Today on CityCast Philly, people all over the world come to visit our city for the famous Rocky statue, the Liberty Bell, and of course, to eat a cheesesteak. But there's so much more to explore. You ever heard of Filbert the Pig? Back in July, I spoke to the co-founder of Atlas Obscura, a website devoted to finding the most remarkable places around the world, about what he recommends we should check out in Philly. It's Thursday, October 19th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Dylan Thuris, you're the co-founder of Atlas Obscura. You're not from Philly, right?
I spent 5 years there. I was a kid, but from 5 to 10, my mom was going to Temple University. And so I was in Germantown for that part of my life. So I have like a long-standing love and connection to the city.
That's so funny. My mom went to Temple when I was 5.
Hey.
Wait, which program was it?
Political science. I think my mom was there for political science, so I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, my mom was there for physical therapy, so a different
probably
program.
separate buildings, yeah.
Okay, so before we get started, I want to know, what's the most random place you would recommend for someone to visit in Philly?
So it's a tough question because there are so many good, amazing, unique spots in Philly. The one I'm going to recommend is one that I think even a lot of folks who live or grew up in Philadelphia have maybe never been to. It's called the Wagner Free Institute. Have you ever been to the Wagner?
I've heard of it. I've never been, though.
I think this is true for a lot of people because it's just like, it's not one of the major institutions. It's kind of weird. It's actually not that far from Temple's campus. It is a natural history museum that effectively got frozen in time in like the 1860s. And gets this incredible collection of displays and these glass cases. I mean, it's very kind of old world natural history museum. And then within the museum, there are some exhibits that are just really interesting. Because of when it was frozen in time, there's an exhibit of like a kangaroo and other marsupials. And it's basically like, there's like a big question mark because they don't know where any of these fit into the sort of tree of life. So that's just a great Philadelphia spot. It's got dinosaur bones collected by Cope and Marsh, who are like two early paleontologists who fought with each other. They were bitter rivals and went around the country finding many of the dinosaurs we know today, pterodactyls, stegosaurus. It's just if you're interested in that kind of history, there's not a lot of other places like it.
So on Atlas Obscura, you have it's 68 places to visit in Philly. I'm just curious, even though you had a short time in our city growing up, but how did you know where to start when making this type of list?
So ever since we started Atlas, it has worked the same way, which is that people make suggestions to us. Often locals make suggestions to us.
Okay, so it's like community involvement.
Yep, and then we have editors who review those, fact check them, make sure we've got it all right. But, the sort of place suggestions are generally, coming from either travelers or locals in a place saying, there's this place that's incredible in my city, in my neighborhood, and almost nobody knows about it. And so that's where all those 68 places came from.
All right, Dylan, let's travel through Philly.
All right.
Dylan, if you had 12 hours in Philly, where would you go?
I recently visited a friend who lived in Philly for years. He's since moved, but he took me on a kind of series of adventures that I guess I would recommend as well. First, we went to an Ethiopian restaurant called Abyssinia. And then, the thing that's so incredible about Philadelphia that I think New York kind of pretends to have but doesn't really have anymore is Philly has a huge underground music scene. Really for real, you can find a great basement show. So go to a basement show or go to the First Unitarian Church and see a show there. There's all these interesting DIY kind of venues. I would recommend doing that. And then if you want to chill out, maybe it's the next day. Speaking of cool churches in Philadelphia, there is a Quaker church, I believe it's called Chestnut Hill.
Yeah, it's called the Chestnut Hill Friends Meeting House.
And they have something called James Turrell's Sky Space in Chestnut Hill. It's this beautiful art exhibit, basically kind of like a little square of light on the ceiling, and you go, and it's just this like beautiful, very meditative experience. Those are all things that come to mind. I mean, there's so many things I could recommend. Some of them are more well-known or more popular, like the Eastern State Penitentiary. Like, you're just not going to go wrong with a visit there.
Right.
You're not going to go wrong with a visit to the Mutter Museum, in my opinion. I know it's not for everybody, but I still would recommend it to anyone who's like first time in Philly. Bartram Gardens is another incredible space. Like, there's a lot.
Now, on the top of the show, I did mention a pig, Filbert. Who is he?
Well, that's the most famous pig in Philadelphia right there. That is
Oh, I thought we were known for groundhogs.
not anymore. Now you're known for pigs. Filbert is a 225-pound bronze pig statue at the center of Reading Terminal Market. And he's really actually famous kind of worldwide. And you like put little coins in its mouth, and then it kind of like poops them out into like a big money pile, which it's like weird if you think about it, but that's how it works. People will say like, meet me at the pig, and people will know what that means. But what's funny, the reason I say it's like maybe you really are known internationally for Filbert is Philadelphia became one of the first officially registered destinations on WeChat, which is really popular Chinese tourists. And it was the year of the pig, and like somehow this pig became like well known. So people started like traveling straight up just to visit Filbert the pig.
Oh,
so it's definitely a storied swine.
And I love that his name is Filbert because Filbert Street is right around that area of the city. So I guess it works. Now, Dylan, you mentioned some like classic Philly history. What's some other, Philly history you would suggest we go look at?
There's a place or an object in the Philadelphia Public Library, the main downtown branch, that is just incredible if you're interested in history. There's a taxidermied raven called Grip the Raven. It's in the rare books room of the library, and it was Charles Dickens's pet raven.
Ooh, okay.
And like quite literally, like he kept it as a pet. He taught it to talk, and he eventually wrote a book called Barnaby Rudge, which is one of his like less known stories. But he wrote this book, Barnaby Rudge, that featured this talking raven in it, modeled after his pet, Grip. And then that book was reviewed by a young literary reviewer named Edgar Allan Poe. In his review, he writes, the croaking might have been prophetically heard in the course of the drama. Like, he felt like Dickens hadn't used this raven to good effect. And then he published The Raven not that long after that. And then eventually the Grip the Raven dies. He ends up in the Philadelphia Library collection. And so this raven was the inspiration for multiple famous novelists' material. So I think that's like a great piece of Philly history that you can still go and check out and visit.
Okay, what's something that's not from Philly, but it's in Philly?
Yeah, I'm going to go to one of my favorites. I'm going to go to the Mutter for this. Slices of Einstein's Brain. Not from Philly, but in Philly.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else you're going to go. That's the only place they are.
Now tell folks like what the Mutter Museum has in its collections.
The Mutter Museum is America's greatest medical museum. There's really only two. There's really only two good ones. There's the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, and then the National Medical Museum in D.C. But the Mutter, to me, is just it's the best medical museum in the country because it's got collections spanning a couple hundred years. It is, historically was a medical school. And in the collection are things like huge collections of skulls that were collected by like someone doing craniology at the time. There are, whole skeletons articulated in the collection.
And folks can actually donate their bodies to the museum when they pass on.
That's right. The director of the museum famously donated her body to the museum when she passed away. And so they've just got, they've got all kinds of different interesting medical collections. I will warn people that if they're really squeamish, like they may find it a little intense. But I just think it's fascinating. There's a little set of drawers where you pull out the drawers and it's doctors' collections of like things that people have accidentally swallowed, and it's just like, oh, okay, like dice and paper clips and like all that, it's a really special place. There's not a lot like it. And they ended up with slices of Einstein's brain. When Einstein died, the doctor doing the postmortem, the autopsy, like effectively stole his brain.
Yikes. That's like unethical in so many ways.
It's not super ethical. This is in the mid-50s. And then eventually sort of hung on to the brain. And I don't know exactly when it got put into slices, but some of those pieces ended up finally as basically slide slices in the Mütter's collection.
Okay, Dylan, I love to take pictures. Where should I go that's super photogenic?
I mean, again, none of these are going to be a big surprise to people who live in Philadelphia, but Eastern State Penitentiary is just one of the most photogenic places you'll ever go. It's so spooky. It's so textured because, it's this giant prison that was basically left as a ruin. It was left in its kind of dilapidated state, just made sure it wasn't going to collapse on anybody. And they do tons and tons of tours every day. They do a big Halloween haunted house there, which is like genuinely so scary. But it's just a great place to take photos. And I think Magic Gardens is also like an amazing place to take photos in the city. Those are like, there's more kind of tucked away, obscure locations, but I think those are good ones. Also, if you like graffiti, you might head down to like Pier 18. I'd go during the day, not at night. And there's like, usually there's some really big graffiti pieces down there that are pretty spectacular. So there's a lot. There's just a lot. Like the Masonic Temple in
open to the public
in Philadelphia is. And it's so crazy looking inside. It's so big and beautiful and opulent and ornate. And if you've never taken the time to actually do the tour, like it's worthwhile.
That's definitely something on my list. Now, Dylan, I'm curious. We talked with a reporter who brought up that some people actually have issues with visiting former mental institutions, hospitals, or prisons where folks dealt with solitary confinement or places where there was lots of trauma.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? How should we remember that history and also visit those former institutions and buildings with respect?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to feel that there is like something like Eastern State Penitentiary, which was originally built as a kind of reform prison. It was meant to be more humane than the prisons of the time, but took a solitary confinement approach to prison. Like that's why it's a penitentiary. It was a place to be penitent. It ended up driving people crazy. It was terrible. It was completely punishing. And then all through its period, it just got overcrowded. And so there's a lot of bad history at a place like Eastern State Penitentiary or even the Mütter Museum. There's plenty of bad history in the medical practices of America. I tend to think that understanding that and coming to those places with real context, and both of those are places that really deal with their history, that really examine the history, that really get into it and don't gloss over it. And so for me, I think there's a lot of value in that. But I also understand, everyone has their own reaction.
Maybe interpretation of it.
Yeah, reaction to that kind of history, reaction to places that hold that kind of like deep trauma, deep pain. And I think, that's a personal question, whether you want to engage with that or not, I think is like really up to an individual.
For sure. And this is just like a sidebar. We talked about the Mutter Museum. They actually took down some of their online exhibits because the institution began to have some of those like conversations like, are we doing this in the right way? So it's definitely, top of mind for people. All right. Before I let you go, any place, that you could recommend for someone who loves the great outdoors? Where should we go?
I'm a big fan of Bartram's Gardens. It's such a beautiful place. Again, it goes back to the 17th. I mean, this is the thing about Philadelphia. The history is so deep. It's so long. And it's all there. Like so much of it was preserved and managed to not be just paved over. And so Bartram's Gardens is this famous botanic garden, started in the 1700s. It is still like a beautiful outside space today. You can go and just kind of hang out on the property. It's a National Historic Landmark. The house is still there. It's got the oldest ginkgo tree on the entire North American continent, so you can go check that out. If it's the right season, it'll smell terrible. It's just a great place. So I recommend that as a kind of outdoor spot for sure.
Dylan Thuras, co-founder of Atlas Obscura. Thank you so much for telling me about all these places in the city that I actually have never visited yet, and I plan to. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and you're lucky. You live in one of the truly most interesting cities in the world. It's just such an incredible place.
We'll have a link to Atlas Obscura's full list of places to explore in Philly in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about really cool places to visit in Philly, share this with a friend. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the Friday News Roundup. Bye.